Alrighty, good morning everyone and welcome to another Security Compass webinar. Today's webinar topic is aligning security to drive business value. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Raquel Rodriguez, the events manager here at Security Compass and your host for today's webinar. Before we get started with the content, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of Security Compass. For those of you who may not be aware of us until today, Security Compass was founded in 2004 and began with a team of experienced penetration testers. Today we have come far and work with many large enterprises globally to manage their cybersecurity risk through balanced development automation. We have three key offerings. Our flagship product, SD Elements, enables organizations to deliver software quickly and reduce costs through automation. Our modular role-based e-learning solutions empower organizations to embrace DevSecOps, and our strategic advisory services offer expertise in cloud security, pen testing, and red teaming for a better security posture. Let's quickly go through some housekeeping items. As you might notice, you have all entered the session on mute to reduce background noise. Second, a recording of this webinar will be available after today's event, and you will receive an email with a link to this recording. We will also be publishing this recording in the resources section of our website. Also, we encourage everyone to raise questions. Please submit your questions into the Q&A chat and we'll address them during our Q&A session. If after our session you would like to follow up with us or you have a topic you would like to see covered in a future session, please email us at contact@securitycompass.com. Like I mentioned, for today's webinar, our topic is aligning security to drive business value. I'm pleased to have here with me Altaz Villani, Director, Insights Research at Security Compass, and Glenn Notman, Associate Partner at CityHub. Glenn and Altaz, thank you so much for being here with me today. I know our audience is eager to hear your presentation, so I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks Raquel, appreciate that, and welcome everybody. So what we're gonna do is just flip right into a screen share where we will bring up a whiteboard. Please feel free at any point in time, if you'd like to ask any questions, as Raquel had mentioned, we're more than happy to take this in stride as well. Glenn, just thinking about aligning security to drive business value, when we first talk about this, usually the discussion centers around how do we go in and begin this whole process. So it involves identifying certain capabilities that from a security perspective we want to bring to the table that enable what the business is looking for. So usually we'll have on the business front, they will have certain strategic objectives that they're trying to achieve. So strategic objective 1, let's say, strategic objective 2, and so on and so forth. That's on the business side, but we've also got something on the IT side where we're trying to develop certain capabilities. So we'll have distinct capabilities that we're trying to build out that will map ultimately back to what the business is looking for. And hopefully we're going to achieve some kind of alignment in here. But can you talk initially a little bit about the business and IT capability alignment? This is before we get into any discussions on technology or process. This is really looking at capability planning. Your thoughts?
Okay, first thought is there's a third element. There's an external capability that needs to be entered or factored into this equation, and that's your task environment internally is shaped by external requirements as well. So a couple of things, and one of the things security professionals have to do is keep their heads up to say what's emerging as threats. So what do we see happening elsewhere? What are SANS and NIST and CMM predicting as potential inputs or risk vectors that could impact us? What are the regulators or the federal, well, I'm going to say the Fed, what are they looking for and expecting the business to be able to do and report back to? And then the third thing is we're into our internal perspective, which is IT is good at running. So in the DevOps world, where we build solutions and we roll them out, you stitch in DevSecOps. What you've got to say is what are we good at? how do we execute? What's our existing state? And then security's got to come in with their expertise and say, based on this, I mean, the way the hackers look at our world is they look at any supply chain and say, where can I pick on vulnerabilities in that supply chain? And then they'll pinpoint all the way along the delivery chain to say, okay, where are their vulnerabilities? And then they attack those vectors. What we have to do in IT capability thing, it's very much like service management, which is my background, and before that manufacturing, where lay out the supply chain, figure out all the interconnected parts, and then say, how good are we at this area? And especially in security, we're only as good as our weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
And so find those links. So you see, and part of that is what's going to inform you where to look is, I mean, COBIT's got good activity in it for just, if you look at COBIT from the managed security side, which is a management function, they've got good parameters for recognizing it from a business point of view. And then if you look at the delivery managed services, that's on the execution side. So they've got the management side and the execution side. Security lives in the middle. Security professionals have to be able to translate what the business needs into technical terms, but also what the technical capability is back into business terms. So it's about vulnerability, risk, threat, benefit, and the key thing we have to do is think about risk versus reward when we're doing this kind of mapping.
Yeah, that's great, Glenn. Let me just bring up something that I found. Just again, in terms of capabilities, there's the NIST NICE framework. There are several of these out there, but here's something that someone put together. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for us so that we can kind of take a look at this. But this is an example of where, the kinds of things that you're talking about here, Glenn, right? We've got certain security capabilities that we're trying to build in here. And it may involve, for example, network security. We might have things on endpoint or mobile security. We may have things related to identity and access management. And I wanted to just make sure that this is something that someone has put together, and folks are welcome to go in there and dig a little bit deeper. But when we start to look at all of the things that we need to do from a security standpoint, the ultimate goal is to enable what the business is looking for. So just producing these things and suggesting that this is everything that we need to do ultimately is going to lead to a discussion around prioritization. So from your experience, bringing everybody around the table and saying, yes, we've got these security capabilities that we're trying to build against, let's say, a supply chain, for example, and here are the things that we need to harden. Ultimately, is going to come down to a discussion on how much is it going to cost? Is this something that is risky for the business? What are we going to do to try to minimize that risk? So it really takes a security discussion and translates that into business speak, so to say. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I've said this to you before. This picture triggers so many thoughts. If you just put 10 controls in place from a security point of view to validate that you're doing it for this map, you've got like 130 controls that you have to manage and monitor. And that's the challenge. I mean, when we talk about building some security capability, this is like a shopping list, and the business is going to say, well, what do we need to do? And it's in each of these areas we need to assess what's our current state from a security capability, from a identify, detect, protect point of view.
Mm-hmm.
How good are we? But then what we're seeing this year is also how fast could we respond and recover if any of these things break. And I use the NIST 3 levels for a reason. If you're in the security team and you've got to touch all these areas, you can't do it. So I see security as a second level coach, and then the DevSecOps, the dev people, the operations people, they run these things. So what we've got to do, I mean, the bare minimum is in each of these areas identify what's end of life, end of support. So where do we have legacy stuff that could bite us? That's the first thing. Second thing then, and part of your benefit statement is, as we go through this infrastructure tree or this delivery tree with a security comb or security perspective, we're going to identify quick wins and things that need to be done in order to improve overall availability, high availability, recoverability, design capability. Because security is going to come in and say, you know what, that end of life rack of servers over there, they need to be upgraded, and they need to be upgraded because of these potential risks. So now you've got a business related risk that's going to drive an operational improvement, right? And to me, that's that beautiful linkage of the business has needs, and they want to deliver fast, they want to deliver efficient, they want to deliver safe. And the problem with security is we're perceived as security experts as duck or no, right? So our perception is, oh, you can't do that. That's bad for security. And you know, there's the, are we adding any direct value to the delivery chain, or are we just an unnecessary or unwanted appendage?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at all this stuff, it's, well, other people do all that stuff. Yes, and a security expert comes in and says, based on my experience and well, the things we talked about up top, the business needs X, you're doing Y really well, but we've got all these things outside of this bubble that could impact us. Here's some stuff. And so the first baseline is go through, you need to do a risk assessment against all of these elements and build that network stack or that delivery stack that says, here's good, bad, and ugly. So a prioritization schedule, a ranking schema, and then you come back with, and like anything else, it's 80-20. Where are the critical few things in each of these stacks that I can focus energy on right now and deliver value?
Yeah, I think
Right.
that's a really big thing. Is ultimately we need to map to some level of priority, and I think looking at where the business sits, they're looking for these recommendations. Sorry, go ahead, Glenn.
Number 4 on that list of things to consider is the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's speed, it's safe, it's context, but it's also the benefit. And it's the benefit to delivery teams for doing stuff, but also the benefit to the business.
Yeah.
And why I say that has to be on this list is if you're the security expert in your organization or a part of the security team in your organization, and you don't get people to see that it's a benefit to them, security is your headache.
Yeah.
And then you're the thin blue line between good and bad, and that's bad. You've got to stitch this into all these elements. So
let me ask you something, Glenn. Who gets involved when we do this kind of capability planning? Yes, we're going to align to the business needs. Who should be around the table? Clearly, we've got people on the business side that need to be there. Security folks need to be there. You know, we've got executives on the IT side very likely need to be there, because this is now a strategic discussion. These capabilities that we are talking about here, you know, as we derive them from some kind of a list or a set of frameworks that may be out there, ultimately, this is going to translate into dollars, right, in terms of priorities. So who would you suggest needs to be around the table in this kind of a discussion?
I suggest a multiple tier approach. If you bring too many technical people to the room, the business will say, I don't understand what you're talking about. If you bring too many business people to the room, the technical people will say that has nothing to do with running my environment or doing things. And I'm not experts are experts for a reason. They have deep knowledge, subject matter expertise around what they're doing. So who needs to be around the table? You need a business reason, so a business sponsor. I mean, this is Scrum 101.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to be a product owner? Who's going to represent the business driver? And then who's, you know, a cross-functional composition of team members to say who needs to be engaged in this. And then it depends on your different levels. But I'd say offhand, you need somebody from the operations side, somebody from the dev team. You might consider legal, you might consider risk. I mean, the short answer is anybody who'd be involved in business continuity planning should probably be in this kind of discussion, because it's business continuity. If something goes wrong, right, we run into issues.
Yeah, and as it pertains to business continuity as well, this is really about ultimately servicing whoever our customers are. So working backwards from there and saying, what do we think would be something that would offer value? And many times when we look at the capabilities that we need to build, they may be highly disruptive, but we are looking to try and go in and build that capability so that we can in fact become more competitive. So I think the business continuity angle on this has a couple of angles to it, both
I,
on from the perspective of the negative side, which is what happens if we were to get breached, and then there's the other side of it, which is what if we don't do it? This could be existential discussions. It could be discussions on offering new services, new products, things like that as well. So we talk.
Altaz, we
Mhm.
got to put apps and development in there. Like we got risk, legacy, biz, ops. You can tell my background's ops, but the dev and application teams have to be considered as part of the cross-functional discussion because and that's part of the thing. Um, application owners, application specialists, development teams, depending on how you build it, whether it's agile, waterfall, some kind of engagement approach. And then your DBAs. I mean, this is the thing. As soon as you start talking about who's involved in security, the receptionist, assuming we ever get back to normal, the frontline people are part of this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So are the business people, because I years ago, like early on in my career, I was on a security panel where they said, "What's the biggest threat to security?" And you guys come from a pen test, and social engineering is the easiest way to penetrate. Right? So it's the people, because we want to be helpful, and everybody in IT wants to help somebody. And the number of conversations I've had with IT experts where we're running scenarios where we say this could happen here, and they're like, "Nah, we got better security than that." And it's like, well, we just did a pen test, but not the City Hub does, but I worked with people who did. We did a pen test, and that's exactly what we did last Thursday. And they're like, "Oh, so right." I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
politics, personality, and wanting to help. So, anyhow, soapbox over.
yeah. Sometimes I've had discussions with folks, and they're not sure what capabilities to focus on. So one of the techniques that could be useful for people is uh, think about what the business is looking for. Look at and write down, what do you think it's going to take to enable what the business is looking for, and you can extract from that certain concepts or nouns, things like that. And usually it'll fall into one of these kinds of buckets. It'll have something to do with network security, or it will have something to do with application security, as an example. And it's iterative. You go in and you kind of think about it a bit, and you may end up going to like a level 2 capability. So in this particular example here, we've got things like network security, identity access management, but there's also a level below that where we are seeing a more refined set of subcapabilities that we're looking for here. So within the context, let's say, of application security, we're looking at a WAF. We want to understand how to manage the life cycle of a WAF in order to improve our application security. We want to look at dynamic app scan, SAST, threat modeling, very common things that we hear about. And this is where we begin to gradually look and see, all right, what are now these capabilities that will eventually emerge in this discussion for us to enable what the business is looking for. And I think the cross-functional nature of this discussion is going to open up all sides so that people understand why this is important. We can talk about certain things that suggest, well, maybe this is not as risky as we thought it was, and so we don't need to invest in those capabilities. Many times security folks will come in and try to achieve a lockdown on pretty much everything. And it's difficult to do that, first of all, from a cost standpoint, and sometimes even from a business perspective, it locks down the processes. So we're not able to achieve what we're trying to do. But that kind of discussion allows us now to create like a heat map or a prioritized list of some kind within the capabilities and sub-capabilities that we're looking for. So let's now dive a little bit deeper, right? Again, the goal is to create value for the business. the first step is identifying what capabilities you think are important, and it has to be cross-functional, focused on business continuity, on the end customer, on cost, on speed, all of these things that we talked about. Now we're going to get into the processes, because we have to ultimately engage and start to develop these capabilities, enhance these capabilities, or continue to support these capabilities that we've identified. So what happens next, Glenn, when we look at the business and we look at what we're trying to achieve to support the business? We are inevitably going to end up with the process. And you had described, I think, a great example, and it's I'm seeing a lot of discussion around that today, which is, for example, supply chain. And this is one of many opportunities, but let's take the supply chain side of things, for example. Within supply chain, we're going to have many different sub-processes, all related to what's critical to the business to move forward. How do we go from that level of understanding of our process and using some of these capabilities to harden the process, to improve the security, to enable the business? What's that? What does that look like? How do we sit down with business process owners, and do we start to look for ways to improve security? Or do we look at a penetration testing report that suggests where our vulnerabilities are, which will give us a better idea of what we need to invest in? What's been your experience? And then I'll offer my thoughts as well.
My experience is there's at least two streams. The first stream is you do a security risk-based assessment so it's, the starting point's got to be, and I use supply chain as the example.
Yeah.
If the business delivers, or the organization delivers certain things, certain end products to their client base, their customers. So I always start with that. So what's involved in, and this brings third party into it sometimes, what or who is involved in delivering X? So we're going to deliver online login capability as a service to the business. We're going to deliver online banking, or we're going to deliver the ability to renew a driver's license if you're in government, right? What are all the components? And then there's four elements. It's people, process, technology, and data. So what are those four elements coming together in order to deliver this? So that creates your hit list of where do I need to go out. And then for each one of these, what is it, 13 capabilities you've got up there? Are they in scope for that? Yes or no? So if they're in scope, boom. And then it's so this is the architect engineering connection point of view. So the infrastructure and the technology, and maybe the data in there. The people side then are the people who deliver this aware of security requirements? So, and not just, yeah, we got to watch for cyber, we got to watch for malware, we got to watch for inside trading, but are they aware of their role in security, in secure delivery? So if they see something, they respond to something, do they know how to escalate things cleanly for a security incident? There's chain of command, there's controlling, if there is a breach, there's chain of custody, all those things that they need to be aware of. And so a big part of a security professional is, do people recognize their role? Do they know how to execute? And can we test on that? And then there's training and awareness that you're part of this. And part of that coming together about solutioning could be you do a tabletop exercise or a workshop where you're talking about what would we do if? How do we prevent a cyber infection? How do we prevent a denial of service attack? What do we got in place already? What are our capabilities? And then you'll get into, well, it comes into two things then. What do we do now, and what do we need to do? And then the plan becomes, for the benefit both ways, is here's how we close those gaps. And then, so it's training, it's understanding, doing a baseline assessment of our current capability from a delivery point of view. And then the third element, again, is that outside source that says, by the way, other areas are recognizing that you need to be able to do X, and so have a response plan, have a recoverability plan. What does your monitoring look like? How do you do event detection? How do of escalation, and you go through all this stuff. And you and I've had this conversation before, Altaz, where your core ITIL processes become a key foundation for this, because it's do those existing processes that are mapped have a security sensibility mapped into them? So do they recognize, hey, security could be here too, right? And at the end of the day, it's where are we now, where do we want to be, and then how do we get there?
Yeah, which
Right.
involves now
For each.
strategic planning at that point. I'm wondering, because one of the things that I've also seen in these discussions as well, and I've advocated for this, is to look at risk as well. When we look across the supply chain, for example, and within the context of customer sat or business continuity, what's the threshold that the business, from a risk standpoint, is willing to accept? And then we craft a security a capability program around that. If, for example, we just simply cannot have a certain amount of downtime because it's really important for the business, then we would go in there and we would invest more in making sure we've got capabilities that would allow us to achieve that. So from what you've just described, the people, the process, the technology, the data, would you agree that risk is an inherent part of each one of these? So when we talk about people, we could have risk in terms of contractors in the supply chain. We may have discussions on new people that are coming on board, people that are leaving the organization, and identifying potential risk elements. And you talked as well about like threat modeling. I think that's a component of the risk discussion. But what are your thoughts on that, and identifying, this sort of the future state that we want to get to, the technique that we would use to identify that?
Oh, okay, that's three things. Risk is behind everything. Risk, like there's a risk appetite. What's the risk appetite of the senior management team, right? In terms of security and anything else. So one of the things you have to be aware of is this goes right back to the Phoenix project that I mentioned before. John's the security expert in the Phoenix project, and he keeps saying, "Oh, that's a risk, that's a risk, that's a risk," from a security point of view, and the business is like, "Shut up," So it's you have to be aware, and this goes back to the top of the whiteboard. What are the business drivers? What are they concerned about? What's their risk appetite? That shapes their answer. But from a technical point of view, you might say this end of support server, right, that has not been, can't be renewed, can't be hardened, can't be anything because nothing exists anymore. But it's also mission critical in delivering time cards to this system, right? This is a true story, right? Has to be replaced. And it's like, well, but we can't. Then that critical business system, which is timekeeping, stops. And say, well, we have to do something because that's a risk to the business, is a risk to our ability to do things. But so then you get the smart guys in the room, the smart ladies in the room to say, okay, how do we fix that? So there's and this is where your sliding scale comes in. I've actually been looking at a few different risk models, but you could go back to project portfolio management. Is one of your indicators is the business appetite and the business vulnerability. The second is the technical score. So I might have something that's high risk in terms of a technical issue that doesn't matter in terms of delivering to the business, and that's a nice to have, or maybe it's a medium. And then the third slide is cost and time to fix. So you start factoring out your prioritization matrix becomes, this is a risk to the business. It's also a high risk in an infrastructure capability. And then you look at the people, process, technology, data stacks and say, what are our mitigations along here? Can we remediate it? Yes, no. If yes, how much? If no, do we need to replace? And so you end up with a score at the end, and then security does this. We all do risk scoring that says this is a 10 out of 10 for must be done, versus this is a 2 out of 10 for must be done. And then you can put weightings and factors and everything else in that. That's organization specific. But you end up with a matrix of the different risk perspectives and a score at the end that says, here's the issue. And for banking, it's as simple as We do it already, and banks do it already for credit cards. People apply for loans and credit cards all the time, and they go through a credit scoring, and they come out and say, this is a risk for loaning. We'll take that same concept, especially because in the financial institutions, which is where we're working at City Hub, they do it already. It's part of their DNA. So I'm in terms of doing this kind of stuff, and part of why I call it security being second level, it's being aware of the mechanisms that exist and what the company is good at, so that you can leverage those and apply it into your perspective. So don't reinvent the wheel. If you show up with your own risk scoring matrix that is totally out of bed with how project management and other places do it, they're going to say, well, that doesn't fit how we score. So there's an integration alignment element.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it gets into now the whole discussion of portfolio management, and over time, what is that value that security has been providing? Is it enabling us? For example, in today's business context, where supply chains are just continually evolving, we're using co-opetition models. In other cases, we've got long-standing partners. We've got short-term sort of opportunities that we want to leverage, and so your supply chain is essentially fluid. And what is security going to now do to help us achieve that? And I think in some cases there may be, even within the capabilities that we're trying to identify, at least this is what I'm seeing, we may need to think about even some of the legacy capabilities that we have identified. To your point, Glenn, where are we today? Where do we need to go tomorrow? If, for example, we've got a rapidly evolving supply chain, do the current security capabilities still enable us to do what we need to do? This is a real question that is being discussed in industry right now, and that's where, for example, Zero Trust comes in. Can we use network perimeter defenses as an example with microsegmentation, or do we want to get into data security as a better model? Or, and that debate is still ongoing at this point. But just in terms of now looking at the entire context of the capabilities, it now brings to light why understanding that external context is just so important to stay up to date, to know where the security concerns are, so that we can make intelligent, sort of offer intelligent advice to the business from an enablement standpoint. Let's take this now one step further. We started with business strategy, talked about deriving capabilities that support those business objectives. Then from those capabilities, we took it one step further and talked about how do we identify and map to specific activities that we need to do in order to build out those capabilities. And I think it's a great discussion that you had there, Glenn. Focus on the people, the process, the technology, and the data. Map that to a specific context and see where we can move this. And so my question now is this the point at which we are ready to determine the kinds of tools that we need, or is there something missing, you think, before we get to even the tooling side?
Well, tied into what you just said, one of the things that I've overlooked or we've omitted is building a security baseline or a security practice. So as what's our minimum viable product for delivering at my organization? And if you're using vendors, teams are coming to the table. When we talk about where are we now and where do we want to be, where do we want to be, security is going to define a security protocol, security practice. I'm avoiding the word security policy because policy is reserved to senior management, but in support of the business objectives and the minimum viable product, a great way to explain this because it brings dev and the DevSecOps conversation into it, is what's our MVP for delivering security. And so you start to, for each of these areas we've talked about, you start to map about, here's what the baseline needs to look like. And then new projects coming in, you stitch that baseline, that compliance element so tied into the MVP, you can start identifying what security controls you're going to be inspecting for or expecting in terms of delivery. And then those get stitched into the auto testing, and those get stitched into RFP for vendors and working in partnership. This is our MVP. What are you doing? How does it work? So we have a security baseline. And if you don't hit the baseline, yeah, exactly. So current state and future state, part of the future state has to be as we come out, what's the expected capability? Minimum viable product is a reason. You've got, our bare minimum for security is X and can be X. And I know I'm talking. The other element, I don't know if we've got time to bring it in, but a big discussion that we've been having within City Hub and with some of our clients is risk detection and prevention. So near misses. As you build this minimum viable, I'm going to call it security baseline. As you build a security baseline out and you've got all these controls and elements related to it, people hit your firewall, people hit your DMZ, people hit what you're trying to do, and they don't get through. That's a near miss. And sometimes it's just, they're pinging to see if you got something. But one of the big values of security is, by the way, did you know, because we're here, we have prevented X number of preventions, or we have enabled defenses around these elements. So it informs your discussion, but also it takes security from being, doctor, no, you can't do that. Oh my God, harden everything. As an ops guy, it's like, what do you need now? But as a security guy, I can tell you, you need to have this added in because it's going to help our organization, but it's going to help you. And anybody who's done ITIL support can tell you that you get a critical incident in your environment, whether it's security based or not, you now have all hands drop everything and start swapping fixing the issue. And so all this unplanned work kills your planned work. And so a big part of this minimum viable product for security is, now I've got this stitched in, how many headaches have I just saved in the ops world, in the dev world, in the business world, because we've got good stuff. A vendor comes in, they can't meet the baseline. Sorry, you got to improve. So a tool set comes in and it's got inherent capability. And the beauty of all of this stuff, not that I'm a tool guy, I'm a people guy. Once you've got the controls built in and you know what you're going to be looking for, then you bring in an automation capability, and 50,000 of these things can be checked in an instant instead of an individual, right? And so once you've got these concepts identified, you support them with some technology, and now it's auto magic, right? And then it's just something else that we're doing, and then you can start focusing as a security team on the governance side of it, and go from the, in COBIT world, the deliver security, that's the front line. That all those elements up above, that's the front line people who are doing stuff. And I don't mean in the sense that they don't have their own tier. They just mean that's frontline security. Security team is second level, where they're coaching those people and they're taking those inputs and they're seeing from a risk-based perspective and a business perspective, is this important? Do we need to act on it? And then above is the board and governance and audit. And that's the third level, who are looking to say, do you have good hygiene on how you're delivering, right?
So that's where, once this has been delivered, then it really is going to come down to, now we've got a few things that we've got to make sure from an assurance standpoint that we're continually delivering on what the business is looking for in terms of the capabilities that we've now identified and have been building out. And you spoke about a few of these things. So we've got, as an example, governance. We have audit as an approach as well. And many times when we talk about governance and audit, we can't dodge the question around metrics. Do you have any thoughts, Glenn, around metrics, security metrics, once we've gone and reached this stage? How do we talk about metrics? How do we define these metrics?
I'm an ITIL baby, so I use the 7 steps of metrics. But actually, I just read a great book, OKRs, and it's how right? So I use the OKR perspective now. So what are the objectives we're trying to support? And that goes, it can tie right back into business objectives, but from a security delivery point of view, one of the objectives is that we've got end-to-end architecture or end-to-end mapping for design. So it depends on your approach. And then once you identify my objective is to have end-to-end mapping, then the metric becomes, or the key result indicator is how many of the environments are mapped, right? From a monitoring incoming point of view, how many event types have we identified? How many of them are mapped? How many occurrences are we seeing? And part of that, so you see the league indicators, the lag indicators, and I did a lot of work on metrics in my life. So I could talk probably without drawing breath for 3 hours. but go back to objective, and then back to awareness and ability. What do you do already? What am I trying to stitch in? So what am I doing to inform and educate my organization that security is working or it's happening, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then the KPIs become the specifics, right? One of the reasons I like OKR is because it lets the teams determine. So the metric is validate we've got the controls in place, and then then the team says, oh, this is how I do that, and they start to build their own scorecards around it. I mean, you've got to have that business perspective. You've got to have the capability perspective, balanced scorecard if you want to go there. So you get into if we take it from the top of the house, satisfaction from a business perspective. How satisfied are they with our security profile? Do a survey, do interviews, do a workshop. Then you've got satisfaction from a delivery capability. How satisfied are the teams we're working with the security baseline we've created and how we're executing it and how that's happening. Then you can get into the specific things. One of the things that we haven't mentioned to make this happen from a security point of view is risk scenarios. So if I build some risk scenarios and talk to the people about how would you react to insider trading? How would you react to malware? How would you react to whatever? Those scenarios can then inform in tabletops and everything else what the teams would do, how aware they are, and you could use tabletop discussions or workshops or even malware emails, where you create a malware and send it to the whole company as a test and see how many people report it, how many people click on it. So the indicators become a specific point in time versus a lead indicator, which will say security awareness is growing. And then COBIT, just, if you go through COBIT, they've got all kinds of percentage of security scenario simulations, number of employees who've successfully completed training, the security reviews, results of security reviews, results of baseline assessments, control gaps, events detected, events acted upon, number of security incidents that have been identified, number of security incidents were resolved within RPO, recoveries with RPO. I mean,
these are all the metrics that you're kind of talking about that would ultimately tie back. Yeah, exactly. And that's it,
and why I like it's why I like OKR is, instead of me informing everybody, here's what I need you to measure, I say the objective is have good security and support this baseline, and then we make it more specific for the organization. And then they can say, my tools already do that. And good, what do you build? And then again, that second level is taking all these feeds and building a scorecard.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sometimes some teams will buy a tool hoping that tool will help them become more secure. But the process that we've gone through here is justifying the need for a tool, or actually more generically for a capability that we need to plan or build. And I think that provides right out of the gate a much more defensible approach to security. That way we are justifying why we think we need that capability and that particular tool that supports the capability. but it also helps us to derive the right metrics that we can now use to go in and provide the assurance back to the business. And I think this is an important discipline that we've got to bring into this. It is a strategy, it is a program. There is a methodical way to derive how we're going to provide value to the business. And it's going to be different for different organizations. Do you agree, Glenn?
Yes, this the semantics are different, but the concept is pretty
Yeah.
structured, right?
The
This is
steps are the same, but what you derive out of this will be contextual based on that
right.
organization.
So and this is where technology enables execution. If you don't know what you're going to execute, and then so the flip side to this is a lot of the tool sets that are out there have good stuff in them already.
Yeah, yeah.
And years ago, I was at a client site, and she said, "I need dashboards, but I can't figure out how to build them in there." And, and she's pulling her hair out, and I looked at the screen and said, "Click that icon," and she clicked the icon, and the dashboards popped up. Right, and she's like, "Oh my god!" And it's the only time a client's ever kissed me, because she kissed me on the. That's amazing. Did you create that? I said, "No, I looked at the screen." So so there's fundamental functionality within the tool sets that if you don't have a plan to execute or to use them, it's like magic. It just doesn't exist. So people will buy $1 million tool and then not enable the functionality because they haven't got a plan.
Yeah.
And it's like, but the flip side is, as I'm building out my metrics and audit needs and monitoring, for example, if the tool's got inherent capability, I'm thinking of something, like a sniffer tool or I don't want to get specific into technology because they all do amazing stuff. Even Tableau is something I could use to build out a scorecard and a metricing capability. But the thought process is the same. What does the business need? How are we doing around delivering that business need? What do we need to focus on in order to enable that business need? The ITIL improvement model is, where are we now? Where do we need to be? How do we get there? And are we improving? And in any one of these things, that's why COVID talks about it's people, process, technology, and data. All four of those have an oar in the water, if you will. So technology enables. If you've got a minimum viable product or a baseline, and you've got all these controls you've got to map, then you can say to the technology, do this. And the flip side, if you don't know where to look, sometimes the tool will point you in a direction, and then it's that iterative approach of, I've got a plan. What will the tool enable? If and then what does our current state enable? What do we need in the future? That informs vendor solutioning and finding out what from our tool sets already or anything else. How do we enable that? And it loops it around and around. And
Yeah.
the business says, good, we have enough.
Yeah. So I think we've probably got just a few more minutes, but I wanted to see if we could sneak it into our webinar today. You spoke about MVP delivery, and Agile DevOps is quite prevalent in many discussions today as it pertains to security. So at the bottom, we talked about governance, we talked about audit and compliance. And the traditional way of achieving these things through controls, is really something that, if you look at a very fast-moving environment, it begins to create conflict. Conflict in the sense that processes begin to collide with each other. We've got latency issues across these different processes. And I put this idea of pipelines here, which is where the integration is now beginning to happen with governance and audit and compliance and DevOps. And really now it's where broadly speaking, we refer to that as continuous everything today. But keeping those kinds of things in mind, what are your thoughts? And I'm asking you to project out in terms of sharing your thoughts for the future. As we become more and more continuous everything, what are your thoughts on when we get to this level and we need to determine the metrics, the OKRs, develop our pipelines for governance, audit, and compliance? What are your thoughts on where you're seeing this moving? We spoke about supply chain and a bunch of other contexts, but I wanted to get your thoughts. Do you think this is something that we need to put front and center? Continuous everything? Should we focus on a different area which will enable that? Just what are your thoughts?
Oh, there's long-term, short-term thoughts. From a security point of view, because I got to put some parameters around this, it has to be continuous because somebody was going to shut down their firewall years ago. God, it was 20 years ago. They said, we're going to shut down the firewall at 3 a.m. because nobody's online then. And so we need to pause it to put this solution in, and then we'll bring it back up. And I looked at them and said, it's 3 p.m. in China when it's 3 a.m. here, right? So there's only about 6 billion people up in Asia when you're saying you're going to shut your firewall down. And that was 20 years ago. So we've got ubiquitous computing, remote online connectivity. So you have to build a continual improvement model. Part of that is, we're not robots. We're going to need our own downtime and a chance to reflect. So this is why these concepts become so important. If you've got a security baseline, if you've got some fundamental capability built in already, then it's continual improvements about where, understanding our current state, especially your perceived task environment versus the evolving task environment is important. Security professionals need to stay informed about outside the house because they're the perspective that says, look, the regulators are now looking for, and this year's a perfect example, the regulators have moved from identify, detect, protect to resolve, recover, respond, recover, right? So they're focusing now. So, it used to be just show us how you'll stop them getting in. And now they're saying, no, show us how you'll react if they get in, if you're hacked, if there's an issue. And teams that aren't paying attention to what's going on over there are going to get hit because suddenly people are showing up and saying, oh, that's all good, but what about this? And at the same time, every day there's different, Garmin just had to pay ransomware to get their code on back because a hacker got in and closed things down. So you've got to be aware outside, and so that external task environment is changing, which impacts on your internal capability to deliver. So, and it's not just security, but security is a big one because there's so many outside agents that could impact us, and it's all about preventing, well, not mostly outside agents because insider stuff happens too. So it's being able to prevent and correct and take it in flight, and that's part of the benefit of security is, did you know we had 15 near misses yesterday and nobody had a blink, had a blink on their screens? And so, yeah, you have to build the continual improvement model. And it goes back to Deming's plan, do, check, act. But in terms of this world, the cycle's faster. It's not years at a time. It could be quarters at a time or even weeks at a time where you're looking at that world, checking your baseline capability, looking at the controls you're testing against. And this is where having that DevSecOps world come in is, as you identify trends or issues, call them events, outside you can come to your test for, so that and here's the beauty of all this. If you test it in the design, it's built, your baseline's built in throughout. If you test it at the end when they get to operate, now you're adding in orthogonal appendages to slow things down. And so yeah, to me, part of that continual pipeline improvement is tapping into those delivery chains, build chains, if you will. I don't want to call them delivery, that's the business. And then incorporating security controls and security awareness into the design, right?
Yeah.
So, right.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of that is listening to them and saying, you don't need security here because of X, right? You've got to be recognizing that they're experts too, and it's a dialogue. It's not a right. Otherwise, you become Dr. No, and they just start to avoid you in the cafeterias and everything else because they just want to talk to you because he always makes me do more work. So
That's great. Wonderful. Thanks, Glenn. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Raquel. Raquel, you can bring us to a land at this point. And let's see if there are any questions. If not, then you can just take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much again for another great webinar. If you haven't had a chance to submit your question, please do so now through the Q&A chat. But we did have a few that came in. So the first one here is, should the value streams and metrics change over time?
I could take a stab at this one. So we want to always map to what the business objectives are. If the business objectives are changing, then we've got to rethink our capabilities. And so we will be in a position where we'll be better aligned. It's not easy to do it in every case. Sometimes there have been investments made, and there's you're always looking for opportunities to leverage what you already have. But ultimately, when we speak from a value stream perspective, this gets into the sort of the whole lean thinking. Look for whether there is a lot of waste happening and whether the current approach is starting to become heavier over time and is not enabling the business from an agility perspective. So I would say it depends. If you can leverage what you've got and still continue on, you can keep doing that. But you've always got to keep your eye out to what's happening externally and how that's also going to impact how you're going to provide those capabilities to the business internally. Glenn, your thoughts?
There's a core set of KPIs you need to keep in place because it's the baseline. It's like in music and everything else. It's the drumbeat that shows you're delivering. There are other growth metrics that would change over time. So at the beginning, it's you raise the bar. So at the beginning, it's a 3-foot jump or 3-inch jump. Where can I get over this? Yes, we have enabled malware tracking. Good. Once that's in place, what's the stretch goal? How do we move it up to now we're using malware tracking to do prevention or whatever the thing is. So metrics change over time as lead indicators to drive performance. Mm-hmm. Lag indicators stay in place to validate that you're meeting those baselines. So the it depends is if you're achieving what is required in the objectives, you're good. If you're not achieving, then it's how do I change performance, and that's through that you drive through metrics. Yeah, and the whole OKR. Yeah. So yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, that's your current future state, right? You create a strat, you create a program now to go in there and see what you need to do from an improvement standpoint.
Right. Raquel? Some of those metrics need to stick, right? Events monitored, events detected, events prevented. Those are good numbers forever.
Yep.
Right. But the number of people who've taken security training, that may change over time to the number of people who can demonstrate security awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Perfect.
Cool.
So we have one more question here. Does this mean developers need to understand risk?
So that's a good question. When we get to DevOps, and now we're starting to have a risk-based framework that enables the business. And I think for, depending on which framework is being used, sometimes risk is not even in the domain of IT, in which development typically sits. So the goal is, I think there should be some awareness of risk and understanding of risk. How this is contextualized maybe in the form of, say, compliance, like PCI compliance or something. A developer should be aware of what that means, or GDPR, for example. These represent areas, if not developed properly, could inject risk. Now, it is possible to suggest, hey, why don't we let this go, and we'll let our scanners and pen testers and other people, functional testers and security testers go in there and catch this downstream. But it kind of defeats the purpose of being efficient and agile. So I would suggest that, given what I've observed anyway, the convergence of compliance and development would be a good place to start the discussion around risk. But I think there needs to be some understanding so that it's not just about speed and about deploying frequently, but it's also about how much risk are we also injecting into this particular release. Glenn, agree, disagree?
I agree. If you, the shorter answer for me is if you don't understand risk, you're not speaking the language of the business,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a career inhibitor. So.
Perfect. So thank you so much again, Altaz and Glenn, for another great session. Just to let everybody know, we do have webinars lined up for the next few weeks. So if you're interested in attending any of those, please go to the upcoming events and webinar section of our website. Also, if you haven't heard, we've officially launched our podcast, The Balancing Act. So please be sure to check us out. We hope everybody found this presentation insightful. And again, we will be providing a link to the recording to everyone here via email. Thank you again for attending and have a great day.
Thanks.